Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. This is our first episode, so we're going to start a little differently by giving some background about ourselves and this podcast. I'm our resident The Nanny expert. As a New York Jew, I grew up watching the show and have turned back to it time and time again. It is the ultimate in feel-good television.
And I'm the resident non expert. As a kid growing up in the South, I would watch The Nanny when it would come on TV, but I haven't seen every episode. And prior to this podcast, it had been a couple of decades since I'd last seen an episode.
We met several years ago at an open house for our grad school. I liked Bernadette immediately because she was receptive to my running commentary.
And I was pleasantly surprised to see that Debbie, who had been undecided when we met, had just ended up choosing the school when we started classes in the fall. The rest is history.
This podcast has been a back burner idea for the past 5 years or so. A good friend introduced me to this genre of podcast, and my immediate thought was that I should create one about the nanny. 5+ years later, Bernadette wanted a creative outlet, and voila, here we are.
Yep, here we are. So we'd like to give you all just kind of a general overview of the show, aka our shticks. We'll begin with a summary of the episode. That's pretty self-explanatory. We're also gonna discuss our favorite fashion, the most notable fashion, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
We are going to look at the notable New Yorkers, the famous guests, references to celebrities, etc., who are on the nanny or who are referenced on the nanny, and they don't really have to be actual New Yorkers. We're also going to have a segment called Yiddish a Cup, which is going to be where we talk about the Yiddish translations, Jewish tradition explanations, etc.
And we can't leave out the 90s nostalgia. We're going to discuss things that are either so 90s or didn't age well in the past 20 plus years. And then we're going to do episode ratings. We're going to give each episode a rating from a scale of 1 to 5 lipsticks. We're going to be keeping track of our ratings and we'll analyze them at this season end to see kind of how it went. This is a new adventure for us, and we're learning as we go. So we may adjust our shticks as necessary.
I just want to say that I am really excited to talk about the nanny. We hope that people like our show and we welcome friendly feedback. We expect to release approximately 1 episode per week, but life happens, so we shall see. All right,
Mhm.
we're now going to get into the substance of our actual show. We are going to start with a summary of the pilot. Instead of getting engaged, Fran Fine gets dumped and fired by her pre-fiance, Danny Imperiali. Trying to make it as a door-to-door cosmetic saleswoman, she stumbles into an interview to become the nanny to Brighton, Grace, and Maggie Sheffield, and is hired on a trial basis by their father, the famous Broadway producer, Maxwell Sheffield. On her first day, Fran wrongly assumes that the children are invited to the backers party Maxwell and his business associate Cece are throwing, and gets them all dolled up. Maxwell begrudgingly allows them to come, and the night is a financial success. Maxwell then catches 14-year-old Maggie kissing the waiter from the party on the balcony. Maxwell freaks out and fires Fran. Maxwell then goes to Fran's parents' apartment and, much to his own surprise, hires her back and sets us up for years of wonderful entertainment. Bernadette, do you want to add anything to my brief summary?
No, I think you summarized it pretty well. I just, wanted to say that it was definitely whenever the after the intro part where you see the bridal shop scene where Fran gets fired and she leaves, I was very much amused when she opened back the door and was like, "No, you fired me. That way I can collect unemployment." Like, I was like, "Good for you."
And then she does the exact same thing to Maxwell
I
when he
know.
fires
Yeah.
her. Um,
Yes.
so that's actually a great point, that there are a number of reoccurring jokes or tropes throughout the series. That one is not one, but they did that very well in the first episode where it was self-contained. Before we
Mhm.
talk more about the series as a whole, Bernadette, I'm really curious about your first impressions of the characters. I know you've seen an episode here or there, and it's been, as you put it, a couple decades since you've seen an episode before this. So, like,
Mhm.
what was your first impression of Fran?
I was again, if she's a very confident woman. Like she just took it on the chin. Like that first scene, there's no hysterics or crying or anything. I mean, she obviously left in a dramatic fashion, but if my fiance of 3 years had casually mentioned to me, "Oh, by the way, we need to break up because I've been seeing Heather. And you know what? Heather needs a job. So you don't
Right.
have a job anymore." I would react in a very different way. And then also, she, again, is just very confident when she comes down for breakfast later, after she's first hired and she's in her bathrobe.
Yes, a simple
And-
"we dress for breakfast" would suffice.
yeah. And, she just, you know, she asks where do the nannies usually sit or, and they're like in the kitchen. She's like, "Oh, that's antisocial." She just sits down with the rest of the family. Like she's a very confident woman.
Yes, yes, she is. Um, what about Danny? Her and to be clear, her pre-fiance, because she said we've been pre-engaged for 3 years or something
Oh,
like that. So they
okay.
weren't, which is actually a detail that's sort of again, I'm not going to spoil anything too big, but that is a detail that sort of gets hedged later on, where he's referred to as her fiance. Um,
Okay. Yeah, because I'm glad you pointed that out because I did not catch the pre part of that when they were having that conversation. Um, Obviously not a fan. I mean, he wasn't really there for much, so I don't really have much more to say beyond that. I guess I don't know. Is it a spoiler? Does he come back then?
do you
Since you
want me to
mentioned it.
answer that?
Well, so we might have to revisit
Okay. Yeah,
revisit that if he does come back. But as of right now, he was only really in there the first couple minutes.
true,
So
true. But
don't have a big impression aside from what a jerk.
yeah, that's fair. How about Val? So she's the blonde, not the bride, but she's the blonde
Mhm.
working in the bridal shop.
So again, I didn't have much of an impression just because it seemed like her scene, she wasn't in this episode a lot. So that I might need to hold out for later episodes to really get more of an impression of her. But obviously, she's friends with Fran, so they can kind of go back and forth with each other.
Right.
Um, but yeah, at this point, I don't have like a major impression.
That's fair. And to be clear, I'm kind of going sort of at random the order in which we're going, because obviously we're going to talk about Maxwell and Niles and Cece, but I'm kind of saving them to the end of my list.
Okay.
What about the kids? What did you think of the kids? We can take them together or one at a time. So Brighton, Grace, and Maggie.
Okay. So obviously, Maggie, um, Maggie's the oldest, right? The
Yep.
14-year-old.
Yeah.
She seemed very sweet, like like they said, she's pretty unassuming, at the
Hmm.
beginning. And then obviously later on in the episode with her making out with the guy and getting caught, that's kind of what leads to um, Maxwell firing Fran. But we didn't really get to see much of her after she kind of stormed up the stairs. So I am curious to see, more going forward since most of the episode she was pretty, quiet and unassuming.
Right.
Um, Brighton, he's, yeah, I don't know a good term that I can use.
He's a
Um,
he's a prankster, I
yeah, he is
guess.
a prankster. Yeah. Um, Again, I did think it was pretty funny how later when Maxwell goes to Fran's parents' apartment to, get her back, um, he mentions that Brighton's been, more attentive to Maggie than he would
Right.
expect, saying something about when Maxwell's old, who he's gonna stay with. But yeah, there seems to be very much a kind of he's not really close to the family otherwise. He is very mischievous.
Yes,
Um,
that's a great word for him.
yeah, he's mischievous. And I mean, he's also not afraid to just say something, like say, to Maxwell essentially that Maxwell just gets other people to watch them. He's not
Right.
doing it himself. So I mean, he's not afraid to say those kinds of those
Harsh
things.
truths.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And
And
then what
then
about Gracie?
she's interesting. you know when
Yes.
they're um when they're in the bridal store later, like getting outfits, and
Hmm.
she's kind of like, I think I'm trying to uh find my notes from that. Um
Yeah,
oh,
Fran says the kids need the most work. You know,
yeah,
this one
yeah,
has
but
no
like,
personality. This one has multiple personalities. And Brighton,
yeah,
where's Brighton?
yeah, but she's kind of sitting, and she has a veil on, I think. And I think Fran asks her, like, how are you feeling? And she's like, I'm feeling empty and alone.
Yup.
And Fran's like, want a tic tac? And she's like, okay.
Yup. That was exactly what I was thinking of. That, and when she gets home in the first scene where we meet her,
Yeah.
um, Maxwell asks her like something like, "How was therapy?" And
Oh,
she
yeah.
says, "Oh, he asks, were there any breakthroughs?" And she says something along the lines of, "We did a regression. My doctor took me back through my
Yeah.
childhood." And Fran's like,
Yeah.
"Wow, must have been a short trip." And she totally deadpans. She's like, "I'm very complex," or something like. I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly what she
I think I,
says.
I wrote it down actually, Debbie, and it's, you have no idea how complicated I am.
There we go.
And
Um,
then, no, just quickly going back to Brighton, I do see here I had written down that Fran refers to him as, you're a bitter little person.
True. Um, I really do appreciate getting your take on the characters, because to me they feel like family because I've seen the show so much and for so long, and so it's really nice to get a fresh set of eyes on them.
Mhm.
How about Sylvia? That's Fran's mom.
So, it was, again, she wasn't that much in it, but she was hilarious. Like, you definitely see where Fran got the taking the pictures when she pulls out the camera at the
Yes.
very end, to take that picture. I thought it was interesting, again, to see, like, in the apartment, how all the furniture is covered in plastic, which I think Fran refers to, like, they're saving it for the afterlife.
Yup.
Um, but yeah, but again, I feel like I don't necessarily have, like, much of an impression yet, just because she wasn't in the episode that much. If that
That's
makes
fair.
sense.
How about Niles, the butler?
Oh yes. Again, I love a good dry British humor kind of thing. He's definitely that kind of character that just delivers those lines, those little barbs, deadpanned.
He's
um,
fantastic.
well,
The-
and it's so interesting because, again, since I watched this as a child, watching it now as an adult, I see a lot more of innuendo
yes,
than
Miss
I ever
Babcock
thought.
loves to be taken in the library,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
example.
Yep. And yeah, so yeah, he's very much an interesting, fun character to have, just to be kind of that person who makes those kind of wry commentary on the situation. But
Yes,
then he also, like, helps Maxwell realize that he needs Fran back.
true. What about Cece?
So with Cece, what's funny, have you ever watched the newer version of The Parent Trap? So not like the ones made like in the 60s or whatever, but like um the one from the 90s
Maybe in
with
a past
Lindsay
life.
Lohan. Huh?
Probably in a past life. Um,
Okay. Well, Lindsay Lohan plays like the twins in A Parent Trap. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because Cece kind of reminded me of Meredith, who's this going to be the stepmom,
mhm.
with just like the attitude towards the children. Um, because, obviously Cece does not want the kids to be at the soiree. And I'm trying to see if if I wrote down the specific statement she made regarding the kids. Um, but yeah, but she like does not want them there, but tries to kind of play it off
Right, she says she
as
loves them
well.
as if they were her very own or something
Mhm.
like that. That's
Yeah.
that not to spoil anything substantive, but there is an episode, like 4 or 5 episodes later called Here Comes the Brood, where that is just so much fun. Um,
Mhm.
and that's all I can think about, with Cece and her relationship with the children. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know if you picked up on this, but at breakfast, um, Maggie refers to there's a comment about, "Oh, Cece's planning it." And Fran says, "What's a Cece?" And
Mhm.
Maggie says, "Father's lady friend."
Oh.
And
Well,
Maxwell says, something like, "No, she's my business associate."
uh-huh.
Um, and it's that's sort of an interesting thing because, full disclosure, every time I watch these episodes, I pick something else up that I feel like I didn't catch before.
Mhm.
And so one thing that becomes apparent later on or throughout the series is that Cece was around even when the kid's mom, so Maxwell's wife Sarah, was alive.
Uh-huh.
And so you sort of wonder at what point Maggie started referring to his father's lady friend instead
Mhm.
of the business associate.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I thought it was interesting too later at the soiree when Maxwell says to her, "Has anyone told you how handsome you look this evening?" And he used the word handsome instead of like beautiful or pretty or gorgeous or anything like
mhm.
that. And she even mentions that later after, he says how pretty Fran is in her dress.
Yup.
Um, hmm
Um, Not to go into our fashion discussion, but her Cece's look is very, what I consider very 90s. You know, big shoulder pads and
Oh,
the
yeah.
long cut jackets, and yeah, handsome was the right word in
hmm
that circumstance.
You know what? I have in my notes the first time I see CC, I put shoulder pads.
Yep, yep. Um, yeah. Uh, there's an episode later on. I won't give the context, but Cece, there's a joke where Cece says, "You're just jealous because I don't have to wear shoulder pads." Um, that's a few seasons away. And anyway, our hopefully our listeners will forget that I quoted that. Um,
Mhm.
I'm trying not to spoil things. I'm really trying, guys. I promise.
I can tell you have a lot of restraint right now.
Thank you.
It's your first thing to talk about it.
I am trying so hard not to ruin things. Um, Finally, we get to Maxwell. What was
Mhm.
your first impression of him?
Well, obviously he's very handsome. He's that classic rich handsome character that again, I would agree with the children. He at this time it doesn't seem he's very close to them, you
Hmm.
know. Obviously, he even when they showed up for the soiree, at first he was still wanting to send them back until the donors started, you know, giving out some money. So I think there's definitely, in terms of his relationship with the kids, there's definitely room to grow there. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for that trope of like kind of the rich, arrogant man, like growing as a character. So
Hmm.
I'm excited to see where it goes.
Excellent. Um, I Fran and Maxwell are just wonderful characters, and watching them interact with each other is just delightful. And I hope you and all of our listeners take as much joy in watching them develop as people, or I guess as
hmm
characters, that I do. Um,
hmm
there's actually, in the scene at Fran's parents' house, apartment, I think Maxwell makes a comment about, well, perhaps if we try to respect each other's differences, we could give it another go. And
hmm
it's just really interesting to see how they try to respect each other's differences and they don't always succeed,
hmm
which obviously provides a lot of fodder for the show itself.
hmm And
Um,
again, I am very like I am very appreciative of Fran being able to stand up to herself against him.
mhm,
Because oftentimes in like various forms of entertainment, you see initially that like the female lead up against that type of male character may not be as in the beginning as kind of vocal about her own kind of perspective. So
Mhm.
kind of neat to see.
I that is a really great point. I think we should talk a little bit about we sort of started to talk about this, but we should jump into our favorite fashion. We've already covered
Mhm.
Cece and her giant shoulder pads and her
Yeah.
really long cut jackets. Did
Mhm.
you have a favorite look or a least favorite look in the show?
So I'm gonna cheat a little bit. And I'm gonna
Okay,
say, obviously, I think Fran showing up in that red dress was a very big moment in it. Um,
true.
kind of showstopper red dress. I like actually her outfit in the last scene in the apartment
You're
where it's that
kidding.
purple shirt. You
That
don't
was
like it?
that was my favorite. That was what I wanted to talk about.
Okay, well then I'll let you talk about it a bit more. But yeah, I really liked it. I could never pull it off, but I liked it.
Um, it's funny because your analysis was basically my analysis, which is everyone wants to talk about that red dress because it is a show-stopping moment and she is gorgeous in it. But that is not the best look on her throughout the show. I will say, in advance of our recording this podcast, I did try to look at some of the articles that have been written about the nanny and fashion. And in the first episode, the looks that get the most attention are the red dress and what she's wearing in the first scene,
Hmm.
which is that black, like I guess jumper, one piece, whatever, over the black and yellow giant sleeved shirt.
Hmm.
But I think the purple blouse under the black jumpsuit doesn't get enough love because that is my
Hmm.
favorite look on her in the entire episode. Um,
Hmm.
I realized as I was rewatching today that the nanny is clearly where I got my love of these big poofy sleeves that look ridiculous on me. She can pull it off, but
Yeah.
for us mere mortals, it doesn't look quite as nice. Um,
Hmm.
I will say that one thing that we've seen twice now on this show, or just in the first episode, is the layering that she does.
Hmm.
She will wear like one thing over something else. I tried to find this article that I read a couple months ago, but I think the costume designers, the people who are responsible for dressing the characters, would spend like 8 to 10 hours a day shopping just for this show.
Wow.
Um, Obviously this is just the first episode, but we have a lot of episodes to talk about, and we will see a number of very unique looks. And I think
Hmm.
the person was quoted as saying that they found like a jacket for Cece, I think, in a garbage can or something like that. Like they didn't care where the fashion look came from or how much it cost. They just needed it to fit the character.
Yeah. Wow.
Um,
Yeah. Just a quick. Uh, I was just reminded of this. Okay.
go for it.
One of my first impressions too, when you get to the house in this episode, that is not how the house looks later, correct? Or
Thank
am I
you.
crazy?
No, you are not crazy. That was actually one of the notes I have, which is, please notice the house. The set changes completely after the pilot.
Yeah.
And
And
so
I
it's
know
not
sometimes
just,
that happens with pilots, but I
yeah,
was just
it's
like, it's
jarring.
been decades, but I'm pretty sure that's not what the house looks like.
So
It's
it's
oriented on the other side,
yes,
right?
it's not just the orientation, but it's the layout of the house is totally
Yeah.
different. So like
Mhm.
where, Maxwell and Maggie come out after she was kissing the boy, like as if
Mhm.
that's where the office is. That's not where the office is later on. The office is, to the left, not to the right.
Mhm.
Um, so I actually made note that the living room, the entryway, the dining room, Maxwell's office, and the outside all changed. Those are just the things that I caught. Like the
Mhm.
staircase is in the wrong location. But also, I never noticed this before until today, but Sylvia and Morty's apartment is also different.
Oh, is it?
And I watched it and I was like, that doesn't look right. And at first I thought it was the color, and I like made a note to say like I can't put my finger on how it's different. But then I like fast forwarded through and went to look at a later episode in the first season, which also has a scene in Sylvia and Morty's apartment. And I think it's the window because the window is different. I think there might be some other things, but it just didn't
Mhm.
look the same.
Yeah,
Um,
I might have to keep that in mind as we go forward with the episodes.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the house, the Sheffield residence, we it's well known, I think, that it changes. But
Hmm.
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I had that on my list of things to talk about. Um, Not that this is one of our shticks, but I did take note of a couple things that I thought maybe worth talking about. Um,
Hmm.
so, for example, Fran identifies herself as 29 years old. How old does she
Well,
look to
Niles gives
you?
her a look on that, right?
Yes,
Niles
he does.
like, uh-huh, 29.
But so, like, as I've said, I've seen this show so many times. Like, the characters, I don't want to say are ageless to me, but I
Hmm.
don't, I do not trust myself to try to guesstimate how old she actually is. And by she, I mean Fran Fine, not Fran Drescher. So, like,
Hmm.
how old do you think the character is supposed to be?
I'm terrible at figuring out that,
That's
and I
fair.
think a good general rule, and I think Fran Fine would appreciate it if we did not guess and just go with 29.
Fair. That's fine. I mean, as you'll see, her calling saying she's 29 is sort of becomes a running joke.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
assuming then she's in her 30s, but again, we'll let her have 29.
I'm okay with that. Um, let's see what other things. Esquire's 10 most eligible widowers. What
Yeah.
did you make of that?
Well, Maxwell says, he's surprised that she reads Esquire, and she's like, well, only when it's the 10 most eligible widowers. And there's kind of a bit of like a dark humor aspect to that, I think, because usually, again, it's the 10 most eligible bachelors, um,
Yes.
not necessarily widowers.
Yes. Although I gotta say, I thought you were going somewhere else with your comment on the dark humor, the dark
Hmm.
aspect of it, which was that he was questioning whether she would read Esquire, which I mean, as
Hmm.
she sort of confirms, but his initial read on her is that she would not read Esquire.
Uh-huh.
So that's where I thought you were going with that.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
there,
that too.
there's an exchange after he hires her on the trial basis, and she says, "You won't regret it." And he says, "Somehow, I'm rather sure I will."
Hmm.
Considering that the show goes for 6 seasons, I will not say what happens. It's just amusing to me that that is his reaction. That I'm rather sure I will.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm also a sucker for like and this is not precisely it, but I love hate relationships where you start out kind of adversarial and
Hmm.
then, they get together. So again, it's not precisely that here. I mean, they're not complete, like they don't hate each other. But there
True.
is a bit of some tension, like adversarial kind of thing. Some this is cliche, but kind of reminds me of the Pride and Prejudice kind of thing, where it's like there's some assumptions, you know, about the other person,
Right.
um, to start out with, but
Fair.
I think we can see where it's going.
Right. I mean, it's sort of they come from different worlds, right?
Yes.
And that is actually something that the show plays up throughout the series. That they have this very different upbringing. They were raised, in different countries with different in different classes with different expectations on them. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was reminded of whenever she's giving her resume, and he's like, "You have a reference from the Queen Mother," and she's like, "Oh no, that's my mother in Queens."
Right. Um, so there I want to just flag a couple reoccurring things that I think I can flag without giving too much away. Um, the first exchange in this episode is with that bride. And she says something like, the dress makes you look like a virgin. Here are the crackers for your morning sickness. That's
Hmm.
a great example of the humor that is used throughout the series. So, like, a character will say something, and then there's immediately either an illustration of it or a contradiction of it.
Hmm.
And so that's the type of humor that is played up throughout the series, which is one of, I think, the more endearing aspects of the show.
Hmm.
Um, Later on, when Fran is in, I'm kind of jumping around and I'm sorry for that. When Fran's in her parents' apartment, and her mom offers her a Malamar and she says, "Ah, I'm not something along the lines of like, it took me so long to stop using food to address my feelings. And that is just not true, as you will see as we progress through the series, that lots of people eat their feelings. Um, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I particularly appreciated Sylvia's comment. Your father and I based our entire relationship around food. Passion goes, sex goes, communication we never had, but food is forever.
Yeah, I did write down food is forever in my notes.
I just I thought that was such great insight. Um, Also, Fran's flippant comment. How about here's a ring, pick a pattern. Like I don't know if people who get married nowadays still pick china patterns or not. My guess is no, because most people do live together. I guess I'm kind of sliding into the 90s nostalgia bit, and
Mm-hmm.
how dated that comment sort of felt. The pick a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was there anything else that caught your attention as 90s nostalgia?
90s I mean, again, just overall, the hairstyles were very 90s. The decor was very 90s to me. Um, you know, I mean, you can tell when this was made. Beyond that, I mean, nothing really else kind of sticks out at the moment. I'm sure in a couple of minutes I might something might come to mind. But again, shoulder pads. We
Yeah.
talked about that already. Just that general kind of look. Um,
Yeah, the,
but
the
yeah.
shoulder pads were definitely like, I wrote that down multiple times. Um,
Hmm.
Kind of along the lines with our notable New Yorkers, did you catch who the notable New Yorker was at
Hmm.
the end of the
Ivana.
movie? Yep.
Yeah.
Don't
Yep.
worry, you'll find someone else too.
Yep.
Um,
So, now are you talking? The other one is not a New Yorker that I caught, but
Ann Miller, was it?
oh, okay.
Okay, who was? Sorry, there. I know Maxwell listed. They were having trouble finding someone to fill a part, and he rattled off a couple of actress names who I assumed were actresses, but I didn't know either of
Hmm.
them. Who did you catch?
The person that Maggie's making out with. Did you catch that? You know who that is?
I don't know who it is. I recognize him from The Nanny.
No, he's James Marsden, the actor,
I have no
who
idea who
is.
that is.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Well, I guess you've never watched X-Men,
No.
the 2000s version. He was also in uh 27 Dresses
Really?
with Katherine Heigl. Yeah, he's the main lead.
Huh.
Yeah. He was also in The Notebook. So because as he's like running out after they make out, I was like, is that James Marsden? And it was such a quick flash that I wasn't sure. And then I was watching the credits and he came up as Jimmy Marsden. Um,
I had
so I'm sure
no
this is
idea.
kind of early in his career. But yeah, that was kind of surprising to me.
Okay, cool. I'm really glad we have two sets of eyes because, uh, sorry. What's his name again? James Marsden.
James, yeah.
So I'm sorry if you're listening to our podcast. I'm very sorry that I did not recognize you. I only knew you from The Nanny. I apologize. Um, anyway, I'm as I said, I'm glad to have two sets of eyes on this.
Mhm.
I think we need to go into our Yiddishikaf. Um,
Yes.
and I gotta say,
And
I
this is,
found this particularly more challenging than I expected because, like, as I was watching the show, they used words,
mhm,
and I had to be like, "Oh, wait, hold on a second, that was Yiddish. I need to write that down to make sure to cover it," because I'm just so used to hearing these words or
mhm,
terms that it just didn't. Anyway, so I need to
mhm,
listen very carefully. So the first word was chachka, which she actually defines as bric-a-brac
mhm,
or like a miscellaneous object. Um, they're the way I think of them, they're like things that you put on a mantelpiece. They're do nothings. I did a Google to see if there was a better description, and I really like the description of it as a smaller, useless object. Um, there
mhm.
was a word that I did not know, which was chiropodist, which is not Yiddish, but it is actually British, and it means podiatrist. Um,
Hmm.
Shiksa is
Mhm,
a Gentile or a non-Jewish woman. Um,
mhm,
she made reference to a bar mitzvah. This is something that I
Mhm.
think a lot of people know. It literally
Mhm.
translates from Hebrew to son of commandment. It marks a young boy's transition to adulthood at age 13, at which point he is responsible for his own behavior. For a girl, it is a bat mitzvah, and in some
Mhm.
communities now they're using the term b'nai mitzvah as a gender neutral version. There were a couple other Jewish type things that I just wanted to flag. Loman's, in case people don't know, was a chain of department stores that started in Brooklyn. It actually closed in 2014, and it was then online, I think, for another few years before it totally ceased um, operation. It was basically a store that was well known for its dressing room, and that
Oh.
my understanding, I've been to a Loman. I had gone to a Loman's many, many moons ago, and I don't recall this, but as I learned from the nanny and from, you know, Google, um, there was basically one big dressing room where people would just try on clothes. It was sort of like a discount, I guess, department store, is my understanding. And so you could get like
Mhm.
high quality designer labels for a fraction of the cost. Um,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah. Did not
that,
know that.
yeah, it, when I heard that they closed, they finally closed the stores. It was, as I said, many years ago, and my first thought was, oh, Brand Fine would be so sad. Um, yeah, and
Mhm.
then the only other thing I think I wanted to flag in this was about food. And as we sort of hinted at, food is sort of a reoccurring joke throughout with people, either eating their feelings or just eating because, I mean, I guess that's another version of eating for their through their feelings is like when they're sad or unhappy. Um, but what I thought was interesting is that the plate that Niles starts to make up for her in the breakfast scene, in addition to eggs, it looked like there would be sausage. There was sausage on her plate, and
Mhm.
sausage would not be kosher. Not that Fran and her family would be religious enough to keep kosher, but it was just something that caught my attention.
Mhm.
Same thing with the Malamars. I actually did a quick Google um, to see if Malamars are kosher, and because they're not, they don't have a kosher certification. Because my understanding is they have marshmallow in them, which typically would have gelatin. So
Oh.
those
Hmm.
those were those were the kvetching stuff I wanted to talk about. The kvetchments to wine. Bernadette and I talked about what we should call this segment, and we went with Yiddish Kop instead of Kvetcher's Corner. So anyway, I had to throw in kvetching. So um,
Well, yeah, I do appreciate you explaining those terms and then bringing those insights in because I know after and excuse me if I mispronounce it. Was it Shishka? What was it?
shiksa,
The one where it's a Gentile lady or something?
shiksa.
Shiksa. See, I told you. This is why we have you, Debbie, because I can't say yeah. Anyway, I made a note. There was a quote. They cost a lot more. Did you catch
Yes,
that?
yes, I did.
Mhm.
The comparison was to a tchotchke, which would be something you put on your table. Um,
Uh-huh.
a shiksa. Uh, I'm trying to think how to. Basically, a wife would cost more. A not
Yeah.
Jewish female partner would cost more, is I think what she was getting at.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I appreciate you explaining.
You are very welcome. I don't mean to sound uh, too too preachy. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to flag things that people might be unfamiliar with and try to explain them. So,
Mhm.
I guess one other thing I'll say is in Sylvia and Morty's apartment, where Sylvia leans over and in her stage whisper says, "Put on some blush."
Uh-huh.
That is a stereotype. She's there being a stereotypical Jewish mother, and that is a reoccurring trope where Sylvia likes to intervene in Fran's life. So
Gotcha.
just wanted to throw that out there as well because it's amusing. Um,
Yeah.
unless you have anything else you want to talk about, I think we're up to our episode rating.
I think you're right. I think it's time for the 1 through 5 lipsticks. And I think I'll let you go first,
Oh,
Debbie.
darn. I was going to say, I'll let you go first. All right, fine. I guess I'll go first. Because it is the first episode and it sets up everything else, I am going to give it a 5 out of 5 lipsticks.
Okay. I am I hate I hate this part, Debbie.
I, oh, I
Just
know.
because I don't know what's to come and I want to leave some room, I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
Excellent.
Just to see room to grow.
I will say I was torn between a 4 and a 5. This is not my favorite episode. Um, but as I watched it and thought about what I wanted to rate it, it just to me felt because it was the first episode and it sets up so many of the different tropes that we see and it sets up our characters for success. I felt like I had to give it a 5. So
Perfectly understandable.
thank you. I try. Um, well, I guess that is all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny.
If you would like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited, and you can also send us email at a fine time nanny revisited at gmail.com. Have a great week.